Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Tamika Miller, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Events at the Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce. Again, my name is Tamika Miller. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Events at the Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce. I am pleased to be bringing you the second session of the day on day 2 of our internship career and jobs fair. And we are now going to be talking to 2 people all about how to ace the virtual interviewing process. And as you remember me saying earlier, interviewing in person and just in general can be a daunting task. But interviewing online virtually brings a whole new set of skills and thinking. So today we're going to be joined by Donald McCauley. He's a regional director with Inroads. And we're also going to be joined by Tanisha Brisbane. She is the University Relations Manager. And both of them work with the Inroads organization. And they're both are going to be talking about how to ace the virtual interview process. So that's something you definitely won't want to miss. Feel free to please ask questions in the chat, and there'll be points in the presentation that they will ask you to engage with them as well. So without further ado, I hand you over to Donald McCauley and Tanisha Brisbane. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I think we have a short amount of time, so we want to make sure we can jump in and give you as much of the information as possible. We're going to tag team this presentation. We're going to cover both sides. We're going to cover the interviewing as well as acing the virtual interview. So we're going to do both because we want to make sure that you're able to make it through all formats of the interview. I'm going to have my great esteemed partner here, Tanisha, kind of start us off. But feel free, if there's any questions that come up through the process, please put them in the chat and we'll try to address them directly during the session. Thank you.
Sounds great. And thank you so much, Don. And if we could move on to the next slide. So again, thank you all so much for joining our webinar this morning. So one of the things that's really important that should be mentioned when you're preparing for an interview, whether it's an on-site interview or a virtual interview, is research. So that you definitely want to make sure that you start there. So you want to be able to ask these following questions. What industry is the company that you're interviewing within? What are their products and services, their brands, the competition, who's the customer, their ranking and standing, headquarters, locations, do they have worldwide operations, which is really important if you are an individual who might be looking to travel and do some international travel, information on the CEO, and then relevant news articles about that particular organization. And so one of the things that I would suggest that you start with in your pursuit to researching the company is starting with the company website. So you want to be able to find as much information as you can about the company. And so a lot of the questions that's listed on the slide, you will be able to find through the company website. Other resources you can use like LinkedIn, Indeed, Glassdoor are also really important places where you can start as far as looking for research. So if I could have everyone on the call, if you can, write in the chat the different resources that you use when you are researching companies prior to your interview. So you can certainly put in the chat information that's already listed here, or if there are other resources that you use that are not listed on the slide, please, please, please share that with us in the chat.
This is also our way of testing engagement early at the beginning of the workshop. So let's see what we have.
Okay, Indeed and news articles, excellent choice.
Glassdoor, okay. LinkedIn.
Okay.
All listed.
Okay, very, very good. Okay, company website is really popular. Industry news. Okay, excellent. So I'm glad that it appears that we all are doing the necessary research in preparation for our interviews. So the types of interviews. So one of the most popular interview types, which I'm sure most of us who are on the webinar have participated in, is virtual and behavioral based interviews. And so we definitely want to focus on that in addition to task-oriented and testing interviews. So when we talk about virtual behavioral-based interviews, essentially, this type of interview obtains information on how you behaved in previous situations. So really the purpose of the behavioral interview is to find out how you previously behaved so that it can predict how you could potentially behave moving forward if you had a similar situation happen. So you know that you're in a behavioral-based interview or you're being asked a behavioral-based question when you're asked questions such as, give me an example of, tell me about a time when, describe a situation when. So those open-ended questions are certainly asked in behavioral-based interviews. Okay, and next slide. And so behavioral-based questions can be somewhat challenging for some people to answer, and they can be really involved. So there is a technique that you can use to help you be successful in asking and answering those questions. And that technique is the STAR technique. So if you have heard of the STAR technique or familiar with the STAR technique, please type yes in the chat. And so while you're doing that, I will quickly kind of move through what the STAR technique is and how it's helpful. So the STAR technique essentially helps you to organize your thoughts when you are putting together your response to the question being asked. So the first is the S, which is situation. So you're providing background and context for the situation. Task, you're describing the challenges or the problem that is of concern within that question. Next is the A, which is for action, explain what you did, how you solved the problem, and then R for results. So what did you learn from the situation? What was the result of the situation? It is helpful when you're being asked a behavioral-based question, if your response is favorable as far as your actions are concerned. So that is helpful. However, if you're being asked a question that's a little more challenging, where the results may not necessarily be favorable, you do want to be able to show how you positively impacted that particular situation.
And anytime in this particular situation, you want to focus on, obviously the interviewers are really assessing what you did. And so the key of the STAR is really your action and the result. So if you were to try to prioritize the timing, understanding the situation and the task, which is the issue, is important. But what they really want to know is what did you do and what were the end results? So that's really where the majority of your time should be given when you're answering that question.
Okay, perfect. And we did have a question in the chat regarding information on how you find information when you're preparing for an interview. And the question was, is it okay to use Google? Yes, it is okay to use Google. A lot of times Google will be able to link you up to the company website and LinkedIn and all of those other resources that was mentioned previously, but yes, it is okay to use Google. And more information about STAR. So again, you want to be able to answer the questions in a way that you're able to explain the entire situation and how you behaved. And so an important thing is if you're asked a question about a weakness or area of improvement, make sure that, number one, you listen to the question. If asked, then you want to be able to state the response. So definitely make sure that you are answering the question that is being asked. You never want to say the word weakness it's really important that you change the wording and say it's an area of improvement or area of opportunity. And then when you end it, state the area of improvement, what you did to manage that area, and how you want to move forward in making sure that you turn that weakness into a strength. So those are really important. And the 90-second commercial, which is definitely really crucial to the interview process. If you are familiar with the 90-second commercial or heard of the 90-second commercial, if you can type yes in the chat, that would be really helpful so that we know, we can kind of get a response as to what you all already know. So yes, so it's overwhelmingly yes. So it looks like a lot of you have heard of the 90-second commercial. So when you are asked in the interview, tell me about yourself, that is an indicator that the interviewer is looking for your 90-second commercial. So it's the first opportunity for you to set the stage in the interview and make sure that you are selling what the interviewer needs. So you want to be able to sell yourself. You want to be able to show and explain information about yourself and your background. And it's really important to share information that makes you stand out. So it's a great way to make an impression on the interviewer. So the 90-second commercial, there is a format that you can use in the event that you haven't put together your 90-second commercial. It's really easy to do if you follow the steps here. So you want to be mindful that you share information about yourself as a professional. You want to include your education, your experience, your accomplishments, and anything that makes you unique and sets you apart from the competition. So other information that you can share is you certainly want to start out by introducing yourself by telling your first and last name. You can provide the college or university that you attended, your major, your minor. If you are still in college, your classification is helpful. Other things that you can add to your 90-second commercial is why you attended your college, why you picked your major, and what is your career interests. If you are at the early part of your career, so if you're a current college student or you're maybe a couple of years out of college, it may be helpful to talk about some of the projects that you've worked on, especially for a person who is in college or the early part of their career. You may not necessarily have a lot of experience. So it's really helpful to show your acumen or your ability to complete and perform different things on a job by showcasing the projects that you've worked on if you don't necessarily have a lot of experience. Other things that's really important, whether you are a tenured professional or early careers, definitely talk about some of the clubs and organizations, community service projects, things like that, that you are a part of as well, because those things help to make you a unique candidate. Other things that you want to be able to showcase in your 90-second commercial, again, giving a quick synopsis of your experience. The 90-second commercial isn't necessarily you giving a long speech about what's on your resume. You want to be able to highlight some of the things that you think are important and some of the things that the interviewer might be looking for in your first meeting when you have your interview. Again, it is helpful in your 90-second commercial to talk about and showcase things that might not necessarily be on your resume to help you showcase the differences and what makes you unique. But you definitely want to tie in your ultimate career objective, because again, that will help you to be able to communicate to the interviewer your connection with the job or with the company, so that they can kind of start to envision you as being a part of their organization. And certainly you want to close up. You want to summarize why you might be a good fit for the role, why you might be a good fit for the company. It is helpful if you know the mission of the organization and be able to kind of tie that in with your personal mission and vision. And then also top it off with the top 3 soft skills that you possess that will be needed for that particular job or internship. And last but not least, definitely you want to showcase why the company should hire you. And as you are preparing for interviews, especially if you're early on in your career, it is really important that you write out your 90-second commercial and continue to practice it so that as you are interviewing, it comes second nature to you when you're talking to employers.
So thank you very much, Tanisha. I'm going to kind of jump in here and walk through the other part, but I want to make sure that there aren't any questions out here so far about the STAR technique or about the 90-second commercial. I will give, as you're kind of coming up with any questions in that area, I will kind of give you an example of the STAR technique. I had to do a presentation at the University of Connecticut. It was for an organization there. A number of students were going to be showing up. The event was at about 6. I got there close to about 5:15. I realized when I got there that there was no projector in the room. And so situation, had to do a presentation. The issue, there's no technology in this particular room. And I was set to provide my presentation using some video projector. Action, what did I have to do? I found someplace locally there. I actually had a hard copy of my presentation. I went out, I got copies made, had enough copies made for those who were going to show up. What was the end result? I was able to deliver the workshop without any flaw. No one knew that there was an issue. Very simple example, but it was able to give situation, issue, action, result. That's what you want to do. Part of that is coming up with the scenarios, pre-planned scenarios. So you want to think about your accomplishments. I always ask everyone, whether they're an experienced interviewer or very new, think about your accomplishments. Come up with 2 or 3 of your accomplishments. That becomes your story. Think about the skills that you use to achieve that accomplishment. Then you use the STAR technique to give examples using those skills. So you're prepared for any interview. When the interview asks a question, you're able to go back to your scenario, you're able to pull that skill, and you're able to use the STAR technique. The STAR technique will cause you to focus your response without kind of rambling on, because that's the thing you don't want to do. You don't want to kind of fill the air with words. You want to use things that are going to be strictly focused on the skill or the question that's being asked. In the 90-second commercial, practice, 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 practice. Get comfortable talking about yourself. Get comfortable being succinct about your skill and why you are one of the most important people for that particular role. A lot of times in career fairs and job fairs, you don't have enough time to really go through everything. So you want to focus that response. So let me just see, are there any questions? Even if you say no, that's good for me. Then I'll know that we still have everyone engaged here. So are there any questions relative to the STAR technique or the 90-second? Yes, you can have index cards with your experiences. And especially now, because we're getting ready to talk about this next phase of the interview. Whether you're face-to-face or you're doing a phone screen, video interview, having a pad or having note cards to help cue you is fine. You want to use it as a cue, but you want to make sure that it doesn't get in the way of you having this kind of contact and interaction that we're going to talk about now. So the phone screen, one-on-one interviews, digital video interviews, group interviews, panel interviews, that's all the format. And I would probably say this year and last year were probably the years where digital and phone interviews were used extensively. Very few face-to-face interviews took place. Now, a video interview is almost just like a face-to-face interview, but I'll have to say that technology, what I'm doing right now in terms of talking on this video screen takes a lot, because you're trying to manage not only the communication to the individual, but there's a lot of distractions, right? Because you're looking at the screen and they're looking at you and there's other people. Clearly, it creates a lot of anxiety. So the more you can do it, the more practice we can provide, the more opportunities there, the better off it will be. Phone interviews are happening more and more now, not just for the screen, but it's happening for the interview overall. Whenever you're going to be involved in a phone interview, so you send your resume off and the interviewer has screened your resume and they've decided to invite you for a phone screen. When they call you, you may or may not be ready for that phone screen. So what you need to be able to do is really talk to them about, thank you very much. Can we set up this for 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock? Or if you're able to do it right then and there, that's fine. But the key is make sure you can remove distractions while you're having that call. Make sure you're writing down the person's name and their phone number. Any phone screen is similar to the 90-second commercial. You want to provide enough information that the interviewer or the screener can make a determination around, should I bring this person into the organization or move them along for a second interview? So you want to keep it moving. You don't want long, because the last thing you want to do is you don't want to be on the phone. They ask you one question and you've been talking for the last 5 or 6 minutes really about that same question. So it's about the practice. It's about being succinct so that you can then move on to the next question. Phone interviews, different than the video interviews. It's very hard to tell if the person is interested. So I encourage you to practice phone interviews, even if you have to record yourself and play it back. Because what I hear a lot is, well, they didn't really seem interested. They didn't really seem engaged. They didn't really seem excited. Well, it's tough on a phone interview. So you have to make sure in the back of your mind that your energy is up. If you're sitting somewhere that doesn't quite create that right environment for you, then you may want to change your seat. You want to make sure that your voice is reflecting, that it creates a personality through the phone so they can see, yes, this person is excited about this role. This person is engaged. There's energy that they're bringing to this opportunity. We also know that there are group interviews. And these group interviews right now, so group and panel interviews, are happening virtually. And I'm going to talk about that virtual piece, but I just want to make sure that we kind of touch on this group interviews. Because we're in this virtual setting, and it's a lot easier to pull multiple people into an interview. So let me just ask this, why would companies want to do group interviews? So if you could just put in the chat, what are some of the reasons why a company would want to do group interviews? Okay, competition, all right. And what I'm thinking about in terms of the group interview or panel interviews would be one interviewee, but there's a number of interviewers online. So why would you have multiple interviewers online? What are they assessing? What do you think they're assessing? Okay, eliminate misperceptions, absolutely. Anyone else? Save time, absolutely. So rather than setting up 4 additional interviews later on, you can actually be more efficient by having all of the interviewers in the room, but recognize that they are all there potentially assessing something different. Someone may be assessing body language. Someone may be assessing the response. Someone may be assessing the background or the environment. It's amazing when you get into a debrief and there's been a panel or group interviews, the different pieces that individuals will pick up, because everyone comes with their diversity, their unique lens in terms of what they're looking at. There may be specific questions that they're asking, and every interviewer is going to capture that, but clearly there's other things that they're going to be taking into consideration. So for you as the interviewee, you want to make sure that you're kind of controlling the environment. When you're in a face-to-face setting, eye contact becomes very important, because the more eye contact you can do, you actually kind of control that dynamic by looking at the individual you're communicating to. or being able to move to other people while you're responding to the question because you want to draw that eye contact. That becomes important. Another point, also to see how well you work within teams. Yes, they always want to see that whole group environment and how engaged you can actually be. But when you use this platform, when you're thinking about the digital interview, and now I'm on the screen and there's 4 or 5 people who are also observing me, it's a little harder for me to observe them, but it's important for me to do the same thing I would do if we were face to face. I need to make eye contact. So how do I make eye contact with everybody on the screen? Well, I have to look into that camera. That's what starts to create a little bit of the anxiety, actually looking into the camera, because I can't do some of the same things I would do if we were face to face. So you want to make sure that, whenever you're doing a video interview, I came in earlier today to kind of set up the environment, to make sure that, I had a background that was going to work for me. And now you can download virtual backgrounds. You're good to go. So you don't really have to worry about your background, but you want to spend some time preparing. This is key about the whole virtual interviewing, especially in this current environment. Don't just wake up that morning and log into the link. You must spend some time doing a couple things. Conduct the interview in an environment that's without distractions and noise. I know everyone's home right now, and or everyone's in their dorm room, and there's other people, but you need to plan this. You need to find a space, just like if you were studying, and you need to find somewhere that was quiet. You need to find a space that you can kind of claim. Make sure the environment is, that's more for my students who are in college and who are in their dorm rooms. Make sure that the room is clean. You want to shut down these things right here, right? Because the thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to be on your virtual interview and your phone starts ringing and now you're trying to find it to shut it off. So you want to put that on vibrate. You want to make sure that you're looking directly into the camera. Now, yes, it is difficult to maintain that contact. So that means you have to practice. You have to practice. This is a great tool. May not be great for right now while you're interviewing, but it's a great tool to practice on. To videotape yourself while you're answering questions and play it back, just to be able to look at the camera and respond to questions. You want to make sure that the lighting is good. That's why I say you have to set this up before the interview takes place, because the last thing you want to do is to do a virtual interview and they can't see you, or the light is shining and so that there's an ultimate glare, because that creates distractions. Distractions are key, whether it's a face-to-face interview or whether you're doing a virtual interview. You want to try to avoid the distractions. We talk about that a lot when we talk about attire, what you should wear. You don't want anything that's going to distract from the information that you're going to convey. You want the interviewer to be focused on you. So if you're standing next to something and the light is shining in and there's a big glare and you're not able to really see the person who's being interviewed, that becomes a distraction. So test your technology. Make sure that your webcam is working. Make sure that your volume is working. That means, just like we talk about on the interview, you need to show up 15 to a half an hour before the interview takes place. But using this technology, you may want to test the technology the day before. Whatever they're going to use, whether it's Microsoft Teams or Zoom or WebEx, whatever that technology is, make sure that it's not the first time that you're using it when you actually log into that link. Because the last thing you want to do is to have to call them or send them an email and say, well, I can't access the link. You want to test that beforehand. Any questions on the digital interview? What if some of you experienced that's been somewhat difficult for you relative to these virtual interviews? Let me just hear from some of our participants in terms of virtual interviewing. What have you experienced that's been a challenge? Let's get those fingers working here. Let's get those fingers working. Mind blank. Oh, okay. We'll actually talk about that. Anything else? Virtual interviews, Wi-Fi connections, huge. That's also a little bit of the practice and on testing. If you can have a hotspot ready, just in case something goes down, that's also key. Sometimes there are hotspots on your phones, but yes, Wi-Fi connections. Anything else? Because this is happening now, right? There's a lot going on in this current environment. You also can't see the environment you'll be working in. Yes, that is very difficult, which is why a lot of companies are setting up virtual tours, just like campuses now. You know, a lot of students couldn't go on campus to visit a university. So what they ended up doing, I don't know whether they use drones or other things, but clearly there are a lot of virtual interviews or virtual tours that were set up. And so you can start to get a feel for an organization, but you're right, it doesn't give you the same feel. If your computer starts to update, that is huge. So now that you may not be able to control, but if you could then switch maybe to using this, and you can connect and use your phone perhaps as your backup, you want to think about all of the situations, or as many of them as you possibly can, so that you'll have a backup. Could be a hotspot becomes your backup. Could be your phone that becomes a backup to your laptop. If your laptop seems to go out, you can quickly go right to it and continue with your interview. This technology, it allows a lot more engagement or a lot more activities to take place, but it does create somewhat of a challenge. It creates a little bit of stress, the mind block. So yes, answering questions and having, starting to think about what you're getting ready to say, mind block comes in. I always recommend that you repeat back the question. Whenever an interviewer is asking you a question, if you give them back that question, what that does, it's a technique to kind of give you a few minutes to start to think in your mind about what you're getting ready to say. Versus, as soon as they ask you a question, you immediately start to respond. That sometimes will create that mind block, because you're starting to talk before you've really had a chance to think about it. And then you kind of get a little bit in and you go blank. So my recommendation is give them back the question, take a few minutes to think about what your response is going to be. Then you can actually respond. All right. So some do's and don'ts relative to the digital interviewing. Test your technology. All right. You want to spend some time building a connection. You want to build that relationship. You want to engage, even though you're virtual, you still want to engage. The small talk still becomes important, just like if you were face to face. You talk about the weather, you talk about things that are going on. Try to stay away from politics, but you do want to, you could talk about the weather's always a good thing. Is it snowing? Is it warm? What's going on? Those are good things. Politics, you probably want to stay away from that. Do focus on the words, because you are virtual, the words come through more clearly because the medium that you're using right now. So you do want to think, which is why practicing becomes important. All right, as many times as you possibly can. Don't go in unprepared. Don't think you're going to wing it. I'm just going to show up and I have all my information. I know that I can do a good job, but you don't prepare. Research is huge. You have to spend time researching the organization and making sure you have the information. You don't want to interrupt the interviewer. If the interviewer is asking a question, let them finish the question. Even though you're ready to answer, let them finish their question before you jump in. Don't give in to the distractions, and it is tough. There are things that happen. I mean, because everyone is virtual, there could be somebody that just walks right by right now, right? I'm trying to avoid that because of my environment, but let's just say the interviewer is home and they're interviewing you and something, walks by. You wanna try to minimize those distractions, or don't give in to the distractions. You want to stay focused. I got information that I want to convey to you, so I want to make sure that you're able to hear my information. Let's see. Before I jump into kind of questions, let me just make sure, are there any areas about the virtual interview or phone interview that are still a concern for anyone on the line, virtual or the phone interview? Then I'll jump into the asking questions section, but let me just make sure we've covered that. Any concerns about the virtual or phone interview? Okay, all right, losing train of thought. Anything else? Okay, so losing train of thought kind of goes back to, and I don't know if that box is showing up at the bottom of the screen. Okay, let me just try to get rid of that quickly here. I think that's something else, that if you have pop-ups, which I didn't do, if you have pop-ups, you want to try to get rid of those pop-ups to try to avoid them interfering with your screen. All right. Let's see here. All righty, there we go. So losing your train of thought becomes huge, and a lot of that has to do with the preparation. The more you do this, the more you prepare, and sometimes it could appear to be repetitive. It will prove to be worthwhile and helpful to you because things will come to you, and it will be second nature. But interviewing isn't always second nature. The more you work with it, the more you respond to questions, the easier it will come to you. The more you take your time in responding, it gives you more time to think about what your answer actually is. And then you'll minimize the loss of a train of thought because you've given yourself more time to think about your response. All right. The interview is two ways. Always remember that there's an opportunity for you as the interviewee to ask the interviewer a question. So when you get to that point of the interview, you want to make sure that you have some questions to ask. So when they say, do you have any questions for me? The response isn't no, right? The response is yes. By the way, I'm interested in knowing, what is it like to be an intern here? Or what is it like? What is the corporate culture like? Tell me what the next steps are in the hiring process. You always want to have questions to ask. Now, what you don't want to ask are questions that kind of will give the indication that you haven't prepared. So you don't want to ask any questions around, well, what does your organization do? Background verification. Do you have any other internships that may be available or any other jobs that may be available? Because then it doesn't show that you're vested in that opportunity, in that role, that you haven't done research on the organization, the work that they do. So those kinds of things you want to stay away from. But understanding about the hiring process, the corporate culture, what is the environment like? What is it like to a day in the life of an employee here or as an intern for the summer? Those are very important questions and questions that you'd like to ask. Does anyone have a question that they generally ask in the interview process that they'd like to share? Whenever it comes to that point around the closing of the interview, does anyone have a question that they tend to share? No? Okay. At the end of the call, you want to kind of leave it on a positive note. You can ask about the time frame of the next steps. So when will you hear? What's kind of the next stage of the process? If they do give you a time frame, well, you should hear in 2 weeks. Make sure you capture that note so that you know when you should hear back or when you should start calling or emailing. So you don't want to start calling or emailing immediately, but if they told you within a week you should hear something, so after that week is over, if you haven't heard anything, then you do want to follow up. And that's why capturing the contact information at the beginning becomes very important. Follow up is key. So when you finish the interview, this is, some say this is old school. Well, listen, I'm going to share a little old school. There's nothing wrong with saying thank you after the interview. Thank you for giving me the time to interview, to sit down to me, for me to share my experience and background. Yes, we probably don't type it anymore and put a stamp on it. I'm probably dating myself with that. That's not how we do it. But to send an email is important, to say thank you. And also it kind of brings back up your name again to that interviewer, and it shows that next level of interest. Doesn't need to be long, but just something that is a follow-up communication, looking forward to hearing from you and moving further in the process. You can take a snap, you can take a picture of this. This is just kind of a sample follow-up communication. It could be used to send an email to the interviewer or the screener or anyone that you contacted with or connected with relative to the interviewing process. Two other areas I want to make sure that I hit, and then I'm going to open it up for additional questions. One is your voicemail. And for those of you who have been in the industry for a while and you've been working, this probably isn't an issue for you, but it may be. And this has to do with your voicemail. If you're in the interviewing process and you've started to send out resumes, and especially for my college students who are looking for internships, you want to be able to present a professional persona. So your voicemail needs to reflect that. So if you have anything on your voicemail that will not present itself in a way that shows your professionalism or who you are or reflects who you are in a professional setting, you probably want to change that. You want to make sure that it is brief. You want to make sure that the interviewer knows who they're calling back. And that is key. Whatever phone number you're putting on your resume, make sure it is a phone number that you're checking. It's a number that they can leave a message. It's a number that you're playing back those messages in a timely fashion, and that you're going to return that call. Yes, we want to eliminate all of the inappropriate music or any jokes that you have on your voicemail. As you're going through the interviewing process, you want to make sure that your voicemail is set up and it's right and it's ready to go, so that you can capture those important messages, so that you can get back to the interviewers, because there's two ways they're going to contact you. They're not going to mail you anything. They're going to contact you via email, or they're going to contact you by phone. So whatever email address you're putting on, make sure it's something that you're checking. Whatever phone number that you're putting on, make sure that that's a number that you're checking frequently. Now let me go to this portion here, which also kind of relates to the kind of technology and the environment that we're in right now. And when it relates to interviewing, your social media presence becomes huge. Your brand becomes huge. Companies are screening social media. They're making assessments about the phone interview. They're making assessments about the virtual interview, but they're also making assessments about, rightly or wrongly, they're making assessments about your social media presence as well. So if you're in the midst of this interviewing process, and recognize that some things last forever, but to the degree possible, you want to make sure that the content that you have out in the cloud, the content that you have in social media will be reflective of what you want to present as a professional in the work environment. So for everyone, I'm not just talking about my college students, but for everyone, make sure that you're looking at your social media presence. Make sure you go out and do a Google search on your name. Make sure you're checking what your presence is out in social media, because we're in a virtual environment. The interview's virtual, but you're also looking at what your presence is virtually, and it has nothing to do with you being there physically. So make sure that that virtual presence is what it should be, and that what should be published is published, what shouldn't be published isn't published. All right, so you want to focus on the social media presence. You want to focus on your phone voicemail, that's set up and that's appropriate. You want to make sure that your email is being accessed and that it is the right email that you should have. And then you want to practice your 90-second commercial. You want to have your accomplishments already laid out so that you're able to use the STAR technique to respond to questions. You want to make sure that your technology is up to speed and that you have backup. Your backup can be your phone. Your backup can be a hotspot. And you want to make sure that you're testing before the actual interview takes place. This is kind of the important pieces. So let me stop there. Let me see if there are questions that I can answer. Anything in the chat? Any questions that you may have that I can answer in the chat? I will reinforce the point. If you want to ace the interview, whether it's virtual or face-to-face, practice, practice, practice. STAR technique is a huge advantage. 90-second commercial, knowing how to articulate your skills and ability in a very succinct and short manner and focused manner becomes huge. And then managing your technology. You can ace any virtual interview if you do those things and you prepare for it. Any closing questions before let me check and see if there's any questions of any of the participants. How do I call back after an interview? Okay. So really, call back after an interview could be one of two ways. If you're doing a phone screen, or if you've went through an interviewing process, you still want to get the interviewer's name, you want to get their email, you want to kind of find out what the next steps are. Technically, after that time frame has passed, you have their email address, you check in and just say, I'm still very interested in this particular opportunity, just checking in to see if any decisions have been made, to see if they're moving on to the next step. I was going through an interviewing process at one point in time, and they told me that I should hear something in 2 or 3 weeks. 2 or 3 weeks had passed. Actually, a month had passed. I checked in, realized that, they were tied up with other things going on. And so the process had just gotten extended. So it relieved me as well. But, without checking back in, I would not have known that. And then we continued moving with the process later on. So please make sure you ask the question about the time frame and then use the contact information to follow up. What do they expect me to accomplish with 90 days is always a great question. But also you want to think about, if I was to get this position, especially for those of you who are already in the work environment, and then you're kind of moving into a new role. In this role that you're going to take on, you kind of know that there's some things that you're going to look to do over the first 90 days, but also you can always ask that question around, so what are some of the things that are important to you that you think need to be addressed in the first 90 days? So that's a great question, one, to prepare for, but it's also a great question to ask the interviewer. Let's see, did I miss anything in the chat here? Let me scroll up. Call back, up to the first 90 days, if they take too long. Okay. Any other questions? Did anything come in on the Hoover platform that we haven't addressed? Okay, you're welcome. Okay, so what I will share as we kind of wrap this up, because this is probably one of the most difficult times now, but everyone is experiencing it. So we're working from home. There's very few face-to-face interactions. So the the phone call and the virtual interview become our normal mode of operation. And so the more comfortable we are talking on the phone. So one, the more comfortable we are talking about ourselves, the more comfortable we are about understanding our accomplishments, allows us to still go in and just change the medium. So whether we're face-to-face or on the phone, we'll still be able to talk about who we are. Takes more practice because you don't really have, you don't have anyone that you're interacting with face-to-face. But now you're going to move from that phone to that virtual interview. Now we are face-to-face. The one area that I didn't speak to, which is happening a lot more, and that is the recorded video interview. Because of efficiency and because of time, a number of companies have moved to video interviewing. So what they'll do is, rather than to do a phone screen with you, they'll have you call in and they'll give you a set of questions to respond to. You'll respond to those set of questions. It will be a video interview and you'll be prompted to give your response. You have a certain amount of time to do that, and then you're recorded. And that video recording is then reviewed at another point in time. So you're not talking to anyone, you're actually just talking into the screen. How do you prepare for that? With these right here. Set yourself a list of questions, and it could be 3 or 4 questions that you're going to practice. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about a time when you experienced a conflict. How did you resolve it? Answer the question looking into the phone, record yourself, play it back. That's the way to get comfortable, because I will tell you, talking into a screen where there's no one there is probably one of the most, difficult things to do, because there's really no one on the other side. So you have to practice using that medium. Some people say, well, they think they could do it, and as soon as they get through with it, they realize, I wish I would have practiced more. So take the time to use your technology, use your laptop to record yourself answering questions, because that is probably the #1 new interviewing tool that they're using, because it saves time, it makes it more efficient, and they can get through with a number of candidates. So practice, 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 use your technology to do that. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Hopefully the information was meaningful and that you can take it with you and ace an interview going forward. It's been my pleasure to be with you, and thank you to the Chamber of Commerce for this opportunity. Thank you.
Awesome, 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 awesome. Thank you, Donald, so much. And thank you, Tanisha, for that very, very informative session, full of lots of information. I see people chatting, also saying thank you. So thank you to our audience. It's very, very, very helpful. I learned a couple of points myself. So thank you both very much. And did you share with folks how they might contact you in the future?
I did actually. I'm going to put it in the chat.
Okay, wonderful. That'd be great, because I know there are going to be probably additional questions or questions that people did not think about during this time. So while you're doing that, I will just let folks know. And yes, Donald's information is in the email is in the chat. And so I'll let folks know at the end of this time, where we are ending this session, and we're going to be going to another session that's going to start at 12:30. And that session will be all about cover letter writing and resume tips. So that's another one that you definitely want to be a part of. That's going to start at 12:30. So that means you'll have to leave this session, log out of this session, and log into the 12:30 session on Whova. Again, so much. Thank you for your time, Donald, Tanisha. Very helpful information. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, take care.